Welcome back to On the Clock, our show about making the moments matter. I'm your host, Elisa Gums. For the next few episodes, we'll be doing a special series in the lead up to this very important election about how it's affecting Black women. Today, we're chatting about the fight for our reproductive rights with Regina Davis Moss, the president and CEO of In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda. Regina, we're so excited to have you here on the Clock. How are you today?
Hi, Alicia. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You have more than 20 years of experience in the public, nonprofit, and political sectors. Tell us about the work you do at National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda and how it is that you became so passionate about this issue.
I'd love to. So, In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda is a powerful convening of Black women led, Black women focused organizations. We are in 11 states across the country, and we are fighting every day to secure reproductive justice for Black women, girls, and gender expansive people. I never like to make the assumption people know what reproductive justice is because, we're hearing things like reproductive rights and reproductive freedom, and it's actually different. Reproductive justice was created 30 years ago by 12 Black women who said, you know what, when I have to make that decision about whether or not I should keep this pregnant, there's some questions that I have to ask myself. Questions like, can I afford it? Can I keep my job? Can I stay in school? If I raise this child in this community, are they going to be safe? I'm worried about things like the environment. So all these questions we ask ourselves, and if we have good answers to those questions, then that's reproductive justice because we've got the resources and the opportunities around us so that we can take care of our families and thrive. But if we have bad answers to those questions, that's where we come in. We fight for those policy solutions, those proactive things that we know that work. And we say, you know what? By coming in and giving us these things, we can take care of our families. But also, if you don't, we're going to hold you accountable.
Yeah. And how did you first get into this work? Like, what made you want to dedicate your life to it?
So, of course, I have my own lived experience. I've grown up in Los Angeles, California. I've seen what disinvestment in my communities can look like, but I'm also a public health professional, right? So I'm a little bit of a science nerd. I study data. And honestly, I just got tired of looking at rates and risk because they don't really tell the story. They don't really tell you why. If I say, like right now, we say Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during pregnancy. Why? It's not because we have a gene. It's because there's things in our systems that, like, when we go to the doctor and our symptoms are dismissed, or we don't have access to quality care or consistent care or competent care. And so those are the things that happen at a larger level that I felt like I wanted to have more of an impact on. The data is absolutely important, of course, because we use that to back things up, especially when we're trying to pass laws and policies. But there's also a whole nother layer of work that we do around telling the stories. And it was really important for me as a Black woman being in these rooms. I've been in at highest levels and been in those rooms and have those conversations to be able to use my voice in a different way.
Yeah. When people think of this issue, they automatically think of abortion. But when we talk about a reproductive justice agenda, it's about so much more than that. Can you give us a fuller vision of what we're talking about?
Absolutely. It is much larger than that. Now, to be sure, access to abortion is certainly important, right? We've seen what is happening when people don't have access, in particular, Black women. We've done polling and we've seen the data. Black women are concerned about either, ranging from being criminalized because they have a miscarriage. We've seen the stories, but also whether or not I should live in a state that has a ban or have restrictions, or whether or not I should even expand my family or start a family. So it has a very real and threatening impact on us. But at the same time, as I was talking about before, reproductive justice is larger than that. And key to reproductive justice is economic security, right? You make a decision oftentimes for a lot of things based in your economic situation. So reproductive justice is getting at those larger things like cost of living, free and fair democracies, because if you overlay a lot of the things that are happening in these states where there's abortion bans, it's no secret that our voting rights are being taken away, comprehensive sex education in schools, they're passing things to roll that back. So we're not being fully educated. So, I have to say two questions, right? Why, if our votes weren't that important, why would they be working so hard to take them away? And if you want us to not get pregnant, why would you be trying to remove the comprehensive education that we need? Things like consent, things like how do I navigate protecting myself? So reproductive justice touches on everything from the built environment. If I have asthma, if I'm at increased risk because I live asthma because I live in a community where there's toxic waste, or bus depots where there's exhaust, or even the chemicals in our hair, the hair care products, right? Many people don't know that they increase our risk for other things that impact our reproductive system. Or most recently, we're talking about things like access to fertility treatments. A lot of times, Black women go into treatment later on because we don't have the access. So we're fighting for all of those things because we want people to not only be able to have the right to not have a child, but the right to have a child and the right to raise those children in safe and the right to raise those children in safe and sustainable environments.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said that because the conversation for so long has been focused on terminating pregnancies, not on, also helping women have pregnancies, have safe deliveries, and then raise safe children in safe environments. And so much of that has been left out of the conversation, especially when it comes to our communities.
Mhm.
So
And can
I've
I just add
also,
one thing?
sure.
I also like to say that reproductive justice also is broader in that it is not womb centric, right? Reproductive justice is the right to sexual expression, the right to disassociate pregnancy and all these other things that people equate that with. Just being able to, it's not sexuality is not just about reproduction. So it's the right to separate those two and to celebrate yourself. And because Black women for so long have been conditioned to think that our sexuality should be a taboo topic, not something to be discussed. But actually, we should celebrate all those various aspects of ourselves, and we should move away from the notion of shame.
Yeah. Absolutely. You've talked through a lot of the intersectional issues that a lot of people don't recognize when it comes to reproductive justice, which for me really underscores the fact that this is a civil rights issue. Can you put it into that context for us?
Yeah, so I mean, Black women sit at the intersection of race, gender, class, among other isms that we experience from day to day, other forms of oppression. But so we never can escape any of those things, as well as we never live single issue lives, right? So I don't just focus on, I talked about voting, the fact that I can't vote. I have to focus on, I need to make a living wage, or I need to be able to put food on the table. And so these are all the issues that we're facing day to day, and we're uniquely facing those as Black women. So I like to talk about it in the sense of like we sit at this intersection that can both exacerbate these issues, but certainly they are intertwined and can't be separated.
Yeah. You also mentioned that you have been a public health professional. And I know for much of my whole life, the conversation was not only minimized to abortion, but it was minimized to pro choice or pro life, making it out to be a matter of personal values. You've dedicated your entire career to the well being of women. And I think you're the perfect person to explain to everyone how reproductive justice isn't a matter only of values, but it's a matter of public health, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is what those founding mothers were talking about. They were saying that it really, we're not even getting into that conversation about the debate about pro-life, both for pro-choice. Basically, what they were saying is you are both getting it wrong because you're having the conversation at the pregnancy, and we should be having it a lot sooner. And so that is what public health is talking about, like all those things in the environment. We would call them the social determinants of health. So jobs, education, healthcare, transportation, larger issues like systemic in our system, such as what do our health systems look like? What does our infrastructure look like? How can we respond in emergencies? We saw what happened with COVID. I mean, I have to tell you that Black women were really absolutely impacted by that. A lot of times we are in frontline service positions, so we still had to go out and go to work because not just because we had to keep our countries running, but because we had to keep food on the table. And I like to help people appreciate that this is not just a moral issue. This is an issue in terms of where we are moving as a country. The complexion and the face of our nation is changing. Now, every child, 50% of them, one in two children are children of color, right? And so we have to be thinking about who's going to take care of us, who is going to produce all of the things, who's going to provide all the services that we need, we just celebrated the Olympics and we're proud. We talk about we're, proud to represent the USA, but who's going to do that, right? So we have to take care of our children. We need to take care of our communities. We have to move away from this notion of it's them and not me, because it's we, right? And most importantly, if we adopt a human rights framework, which is what the founding mothers were saying, was, they've traveled around the globe and they've said, the countries that do this, get this right, are the ones that have adopted a human rights framework, which says just by virtue of being born, you, no matter your race, your creed, your gender, just by virtue of being born, you should be entitled to the resources and the supports and everything you need so that you can thrive. And if we believed that, then other people wouldn't be harmed.
Yeah. So thank you so much for sort of laying that groundwork for us so that we could get a grasp on what reproductive justice means. Now that we understand that, can you tell us what's at stake for us as a country right now? Like, what is the landscape we're in?
Well, I mean, we are seeing our 2 years post Dobbs what it's like to be a Black woman in this current state. We are seeing skyrocketing maternal mortality rates. We are seeing, our fundamental rights being taken away right before our eyes. What's at stake is that if we don't show up and say that we are no longer going to accept this, our lives, our joy, our livelihood, our well-being is going to be impacted for decades to come. I mean, the Project 2025 has just laid it out for you, and it said what they plan to do. I mean, it's a long document, but pick an issue. There is something in there that's going to impact you. And so, what we're doing through both in our own voice with our policy agenda is to demonstrate to those elected officials that come in that, hey, we've done the work for you. Here's a blueprint. All you have to do is read this and pick an issue, but also we're there to help you. But also through our action fund, we're going a little bit farther and saying we're going to hold you accountable and we're going to help you identify those candidates or those elected officials that have committed to being reproductive justice champions. Because when I look at, there's one group that wants for us to have freedom, and there's another group that doesn't. And the one that doesn't is quite frankly proud of it.
Yes, very, very proud of it. In terms of telling all of us how it is that we should approach child, having children, not having children, um, and taking that choice away from us. But you mentioned Project 2025, and I know that most of us, of course, have not read through the very long document. Many people are getting their news about it from places that may not be credible. And so, while we have you here as an expert, I would love for you to share what reproductive justice advocates are concerned about when it comes to Project 2025.
Well, I mean, I will tell you that we are doing our analysis, and so hot off the press at the Congressional Black Caucus, we're going to be releasing our Project 2025 analysis. So stay tuned for that. But, we are, as I said, because reproductive justice is so broad, we're looking at it from all aspects, everything from, the impact on the economy to, our law enforcement. We don't want our children subjected to even more over policing, right? I mean, it is not funny, but it is so ridiculous. Some of the things that are in this document. We're trying to make sure that our communities are protected and that we can make sure that our families are taken care of by placing this in plain language. But at its core, everyone is talking about the economy, and there is a group that desires to make some people rich and richer, and the haves and the have nots. And that's what we're trying to do, is to make sure that we have all of the economic supports, all of the opportunities that we can, by uncovering all the insidious and um, disentangle all of the things that are happening, so that we can be very clear when we go into the ballot box who is going to help support us, our lives. Because I like to help people appreciate that, yes, Project 2025 is important to know, but there are over 500,000 elected offices, positions that people run for in this country, right? So those are the people that are making the decisions about your the books your kids can read, what they can learn in school, like critical race theory, you know, the what sort of funding you get in your community. That's where that happens. So that's why we work so hard to tell people it's absolutely important for you to vote in these larger elections, but you have to vote every year, all the way down the ballot for every election.
Yeah. You talked about sort of what's at stake for the country, and that the decisions that are made right now can impact our lives for decades to come. For Black women specifically, um, what are we at risk of losing? Aside from, people just think the ability to terminate a pregnancy, but what are sort of the long term effects of what we're at risk for losing when our reproductive rights are threatened?
Well, we're at risk of losing the way that we access care. We are at risk of losing our, our rights to vote. I don't, there are people that are actively going and learning that their names have been removed from the rolls. They are closing DMVs, so that's making it difficult for people to register. They are moving bus routes in certain communities so they can't get to the polls. So what you are at risk of is the disinvestment in your communities, right? And when you don't have the resources in your community, then it's just a snowball effect, right? That has an impact on budgets, that has an impact on services, the businesses that come into your communities. This is what we talk about when we say we want to raise our kids in sustainable communities and safe communities, right? Now, of course, we've talked about the most obvious things, which is, our our ability to survive, right? Never would anyone have ever imagined that when I become pregnant, I need to additional choice I need to be thinking about is, how do I stay alive, right? Because that, is not turning around, and we're seeing maternity deserts and doctors not and leaving the picking up their practices and taking them to other places so that they can practice. Or I mean, even new medical students deciding not to go to certain states because they want to be trained, and in some cases they won't be able to even learn certain procedures because they're illegal. So all of that's at stake because when you take such drastic means to do these things, that it has so many unintended consequences. That it used to be when you passed policy or you proposed policy, you had a responsibility to do that work, to say, okay, here, what are the consequences that I don't intend to happen, um, that will be as a result of this policy, right? So I'm not saying that people don't do that, but what I am saying is that if you are and you're overlooking that what does that say about where we're headed as a country? So what is at stake is that you have a group of people who think that we're dispensable unless we stand up and do something.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you brought up the Black maternal health crisis. As you put it plainly, we are fighting to stay alive. You mentioned earlier the statistic that we are 3.5 times more likely to die during pregnancy. I think we've all heard the comparison that some parts of the US are on par with developing nations when it comes to the mortality rates of pregnant women of color. And we recently spoke with the co-founder of Black Voters Matter, who was telling us that for Black women voters, safety is one of the number one issues that they have. So, how can reproductive health policies make Black women safer?
Well, safety can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, right? It could mean safety in our communities in terms of, um, at a more personal level, in terms of intimate partner violence. That's absolutely a reproductive justice issue. Some women may not want to continue their pregnancy because their partner may not have wanted them to become pregnant. And so there's a concern there. Or we've had the woman in a couple of almost a decade ago in Florida who fired the warning shot several weeks after her giving birth to her partner and then was in jail. And so if people don't think that's a reproductive justice issue, it absolutely is. Or safety for our children. Um, you know, I have a 16-year-old son who's a straight A student, but the thought that someone would think he's a threat just because of the color of his skin, these are all things that we're concerned about. But then there's safety in terms of when we go to the doctor, or safety in terms of the laws. We talked about, people, our polls show that women of childbearing age are concerned about being criminalized, um, because they have to go, they have a miscarriage and they go to the emergency room to get care. So, and then of course, safety in terms of the economy and being able to know that, I have a consistent income so I can take care of myself and take care of my family.
Yeah. Vice President Kamala Harris has made this issue a cornerstone of her campaign. What do you want to see from the next administration when it comes to reproductive justice?
I mean, I do have to say that, first of all, it's a historic moment.
Yes.
And, it's historic for In Our Own Voice in a couple of ways. First of all, I'm in Chicago right now. This is the birthplace of reproductive justice. 12 women just down the road said, you know what? I this is not right. We continue to focus only on these one central issue, and there's so many other issues. And here we are in the sense of a lot of things that have not changed, right? We still have
Yeah.
the high maternal mortality rates, HIV/AIDS rates, all the other things. But that needless to say, this is a historic moment. We are proud to endorse the vice president. She has personally named reproductive justice. She understands the difference between reproductive justice, reproductive health, and reproductive rights. She gets it. She's been consistent in her advocacy and leadership to advance reproductive justice, starting back to when she was a top cop to the Senate and, championing maternal mortality. She is the first to visit an abortion clinic, to dedicate a nationwide tour to winning back reproductive autonomy. And then she just also knows that this issue is much more than abortion access, that it was going to require policies that protect our rights. She worked on the child tax credit and, has championed affordable child care and paid leave, and the ability for us to pay for higher education so that we can better ourselves. And so, from a reproductive justice standpoint in our Black reproductive justice policy agenda, she checks all the boxes and we are thrilled.
Yeah. We all know that we need to get out and vote on election day. And as you pointed out earlier, not just election day in a presidential year and not just for national offices, but you need to vote down the ballot. Aside from voting, what else do we all as Black women need to be doing to win back some of these reproductive rights or to safeguard our reproductive justice?
Well, I mean, we need to be, Black women, we have our sister friends. We have our, kitchen table conversations. When we get together for our family gatherings, we all gather in that kitchen, and we need to use that time to tell people our stories. Everybody's had a story, or maybe they know someone about how certain policies or certain, experiences, or maybe they needed something or they needed a resource and they couldn't access it because of a policy or because of a law, or God forbid, maybe someone has lost a family member to maternal mortality. And so we do what we do best, which is to tell our stories, and then we take care of each other, right? We get together and we say, no, this will not stand, and we're going to do something about it. You do not have to be a person of influence or this person with this long history of being an activist to make a change. A lot of those women, those 12 founding mothers of reproductive justice, were not activists. They saw something that wasn't right and they took a step and said, we want to do something about it. And so that's what we need to continue to do. We need to make sure that we're bringing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people to the polls. We need to check our registration status. As I just told you, they are actively removing people who have been voting in every election for decades. They are finding themselves removed from the voting rolls. And so we need to check our registration status, register to vote if we haven't, make a voting plan. Maybe you can't go, or maybe you have to work. You can do absentee voting, because we need everybody to show up, because if we don't, people have said, it's really dire. We've heard that before, and people will say, yeah, we might be crying wolf, but we're not crying wolf this time. If the last 2 years haven't given you a indication of where things are going, I don't know how else to put this more plainly.
Yeah. This has been so illuminating. Thank you, Regina, for sharing the unique ways you're helping us make the most of the time we've been given by protecting the complete well-being, including the reproductive health of women of color. And thank you all for watching On the Clock. We'll see you next time as we continue to talk about working with purpose and living with passion.